The roundtable now, Democratic strategist Donna Brazile, Oklahoma Congressman Tom Cole, CNN Crossfire co-host S.E. Cupp, and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who is also his movie Inequality for All, now out on Netflix. Donna, I got to start with you. We are at the 100-day mark before the midterm elections. This is when all the negative advertising comes out in full force. And yet, this week we saw the Republicans do something unusual. You had Rand Paul going to the National Urban League talking about Republicans appealing to African-American voters. And you had Paul Ryan saying Republicans need an anti-poverty plan. What's going on?
Well, first of all, they read the autopsy report and decided they did not want to be part of the walking dead in terms of future elections. I mean, Senator Paul is making a serious effort at trying to have a different conversation with African-American voters, not on traditional issues. He wants to talk about, economic development in poor inner-city areas. He wants to talk about schools. And clearly he wants to talk about this mandatory sentencing. He wants to talk about restoring the right to vote for ex-felons convicted of nonviolent crimes.
You sound like you're ready to jump on the Rand Paul for president bandwagon.
No, it sounds like I've had a lot of time to talk to Rand Paul. I see him in CNN just about every other day. And I think these conversations should be had. And I'm glad there's a Republican willing to sit down with Senator Cory Booker, sit down with Senator Tim Scott, who happens to be a Republican, sit down with the Attorney General of the United States, because these are serious issues that need to be resolved, and we don't need a partisan solution. Now, on Paul Ryan, I think it's interesting that he's trying to come up with a big plan to reduce poverty in America. Part of it is expanding the earned income tax credit, which is a good thing. There's parts of it in terms of consolidating programs into a block grant. I don't know if that's so good.
But Congressman Cole, I mean, we're not going to see African Americans a big part of that Republican coalition. I mean, what were you at, like 6% in the last?
Yeah, well, it'll probably go up once the president leaves office, but it's not going to grow dramatically overnight. But the reality is there's millions of conservative African Americans. I mean, Tim Scott, J.C. Watts, my T.W. Shannon, who just made a race for the Senate in Oklahoma. So there's
but
lots
only
of common...
one in the entire Congress.
Yeah, well, again, I think there are millions of conservatives. I don't think we've done a very good job as a party reaching into those communities. And I really appreciate what Senator Paul and Congressman Ryan are doing. I think this is extraordinarily important. And it's important to note they're doing it in ways that are pretty consistent with Republican core principles. If you look at the Ryan plan, it's really based on federalism and personal responsibility are big elements of it. But it's a step in the right direction.
Now, Robert, you're not a Paul Ryan guy. I mean, you've been about as critical of him as anybody, but I've seen it. You think that this poverty plan is a serious one?
I think it's a serious one. In fact, I was frankly very impressed. Paul Ryan, who has been cutting programs for the poor left and right, or at least trying to do that for several years now, awarding tax breaks to the rich. Suddenly, he has had a conversion of some sort, and he is now coming out with a plan that is actually a very interesting plan. Not only does it expand the earned income tax credit, which is the most important anti-poverty policy we have now in the federal government, he extends it, he expands it. He provides some guidance to the states in terms of actually helping people go forward. It is not exactly a block grant. There are no cuts to poverty programs. This is something that is very new and different from the Republican Party, and I think it deserves a careful look by Democrats.
Yeah, and I'll take issue a little bit, John, with your classifying this as unusual for Republicans. Paul Ryan's been talking about poverty for years, maybe not in the way that Democrats
but now he's putting out a specific anti-poverty plan.
He's put out poverty plans before. He's put out poverty proposals before. And you're right, this is a serious plan. I'm glad to see liberals like Robert taking it seriously. I'm hoping Democrats will take it seriously, because for all the talk recently about poverty, poverty has risen under this president over the past 6 years. Income inequality has widened. And I'd like to see Democrats taking this opportunity to say, applaud you, Paul Ryan. Let's work together to make this proposal a reality. Poverty is a serious problem. Paul Ryan's already proven with Patty Murray he can work across the aisle. It's time for Democrats to prove they want to work with Republicans, too.
But it's not sound bites, that finally we're hearing from Republicans. We hear a lot of sound bites. This is substance. And I think what attracts not just liberals or progressives or anyone else is when you have substance on the table, when you can actually look at a plan and see how it helps people. And what was missing in the plan, and we want to talk about the real stew there, was the fact that he didn't talk about raising the minimum wage. That will also help a generation of Americans come out of poverty poverty as well, if we can finally tackle that issue
But
as well.
raising the minimum wage is not going to solve poverty. And if you want to talk about talking points, Donna, that's all we've heard from Democrats over the past year.
What we see from Democrats as a rule is, frankly, just a reflexive defense of everything we did in the 1960s. There's not a lot of new thinking on the Democratic side. I actually hope this sparks that. I mean, I think this could be the beginning of a real national dialogue where we get our friends on the other side to think, hey, some of these programs really don't work. We put a lot of money into them. Maybe there's a better approach.
Well, the real issue here, I mean, we go Democrat, Republican, in this town. It's all about conflict. I think the American people really genuinely want some of these problems solved. And I think that the Paul Ryan plan, it is not perfect in every way. I agree completely with Donna, but at least it's a beginning point of conversation.
Right.
Okay, we've got to take a quick break. Next, the surprising milestone in the debate over legalized marijuana, ripped from the pages of the New York Times. Keith Olbermann, one of many, outraged this week over this disturbing video obtained by TMZ Sports of Baltimore Ravens star Ray Rice dragging his unconscious then-girlfriend out of an elevator after he punched her in the face. His penalty from the NFL? A 2-game suspension. The roundtable is back now to weigh in. Congressman Cole, you don't agree with Keith Olbermann on much, but do you agree that the NFL screwed up here?
Yeah, they probably should have done a great deal more than they did, quite frankly. But I will say there are criminal avenues available. There are civil penalties available. You know, he did pay $500,000. I think this is a good discussion that we're having. Frankly, it's actually, in a funny way, a contribution because it sparked the national dialogue and outrage. But this is a big problem in the country. I'm pleased to play a leading role, actually, in passing the Violence Against Women Act, the reauthorization of that recently. There's just no place for this, no excuse for it.
And a $500,000 penalty for a guy that's made over $20 million over the past 2 years.
That's a parking ticket.
Yeah.
It's time for the NFL it's time for the men who run the NFL. I need to be, you know, this is the men who run the NFL. They need to understand that this is a huge problem. And by slapping a small penalty on him, it sends the wrong message to kids, okay? So I think, here's a guy who dragged his unconscious wife, and we see this video, and to give him just a little slap, no, they should have really made him pay a price. I think the NFL should have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to domestic violence.
The NFL has a domestic violence problem. We all know this. And by basically saying to a player that you can get away with this is less than a slap on the wrist. This is less than almost any kind of penalty they've given for almost anything else.
Bye week.
They're sending a message, unfortunately, to this country that has a domestic violence problem. This country has a serious domestic violence problem. It cuts across all classes.
I fail to see the news here. The NFL is a place where you can beat your wife and play again, where you can torture animals and play again, where you can abuse drugs, maybe have an accident, play again. I think what's interesting is it puts Tony Dungy's comments about Michael Sam in perspective. Let's be less concerned about the gay guy in the locker room and more concerned about criminals in the league.
All right, now to a surprising twist in the debate over legalizing marijuana. Check your copy of the New York Times this morning, and you may want to do a double take. You'll find an editorial that looks like a manifesto, the newspaper coming out in favor of legalizing pot. Earlier, we spoke with editorial page editor Andrew Rosenthal. Andy, I have to say I am a little bit surprised to see the Times following in the footsteps of High Times magazine. You know, it was 40 years ago this summer that High Times first came out for legalizing marijuana. And here now, the New York Times bluntly saying, repeal the ban on marijuana. What gives?
Well, I'm glad you're surprised. I'm not sure we would have been ready to do it 40 years ago. But, you know, the country has been moving in this direction. Public opinion is clearly there. We've been watching the states experiment, and more states now, it's about 37, allow marijuana either for medical and now for recreational use, and they're doing it in defiance of the federal ban.
Were you concerned about sending a signal, particularly to young people, that there's nothing wrong with smoking marijuana?
You know, we thought about that, and we discussed it, and, you know, we think that there should be a 21-year age limit on it, although, you know, that'll be permeable, I'm sure. And I guess the point is we're not urging people to smoke pot any more than we are for them to drink alcohol or to smoke cigarettes. It's just that making it illegal was creating a social cost for the country that was absolutely unacceptable.
Your editorial page has been on the forefront of limiting tobacco use. I mean, you've praised Michael Bloomberg over and over again for his efforts in New York City. One editorial several years ago, you said, since taking office, Mr. Bloomberg has been a kind of anti-Marlboro man, targeting smoking as a public health enemy, which makes him one of the best things to happen to lungs since the chest x-ray. So here you have a virtual ban on cigarette smoking in public places, which the Times liked. Why are you so tough on tobacco and so easy on cannabis?
Well, again, that's a local decision. It wasn't made by Congress, which is really important. And the other is that tobacco use kills you. The medical evidence on marijuana is completely different.
Okay, so before you go, I got to ask one more question. Do you guys smoke pot?
I've never asked the people that work for me whether they smoke pot, and I'm not going to ask. I have smoked pot in my life. I went to college in Colorado in the 1970s. You figure it out.
All right, Andrew Rosenthal, the editorial page editor of the New York Times. All right, so Congressman Cole, he is making a conservative states' rights argument. Let the localities decide whether or not to legalize pot. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think we're probably moving in that direction. Frankly, laws are changing, habits are changing. I'm not somebody that, frankly, advocates this. I went to college in the 60s at Grinnell College. I didn't smoke pot. Don't think it's a good thing to be promoting.
But you wouldn't oppose lifting the federal ban.
I think,
what
I would say is let's have a real piece of legislation work through the legislative process on this. You know, so far what we've done is mostly vote on amendments. That's never a good idea to make major policy changes. We've got some advocates, Democrat and Republican. I'd like to see this stuff introduced, seriously taken up in committee, and let's have a national dialogue about it. But not a habit I want to encourage.
Well, I think it's high time. But let me just say this: our prisons are filled with nonviolent criminals, many of whom are there because they've been arrested for selling or using pot. You know, this war against drugs, particularly with regard to marijuana, has been lost. And we see the evidence of that all around us. And I think it is very necessary to start this national dialogue.
Let's not forget war on drugs, Ronald Reagan. This was just say no.
Look,
zero tolerance.
A lot
Is that all gone?
a lot of the people who are routinely arrested for marijuana use are young people. If we're going to put a legal age restriction of 21, that's not going to stop a lot of the arrests of young people. I don't know that this is the way to solve these social problems, and I think we all agree those are social problems. I think it's unsettled yet. We need a little bit more time in the laboratories of democracy to see how this affects crime and young people and the economy.
Putting it back to the states.
And
Donna,
then we can look at Colorado and Washington as two model states that we can see crime is going down, supposedly in Denver. Look, we spent close to $4 billion enforcing, you know, these laws. We have put countless number of young model citizens in jail because they possess a weed, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. It is high time. I agree.
High time. All right. We are out of time. Donna Brazile, Tom Cole, SC Cupp, Robert Reich, thank you for joining us. So who was the first sitting president to visit the Baseball Hall of Fame? The roundtable is with us now. Let's see what you came up with. Donna Brazile, you must know the answer to this. Right. Roosevelt. You don't say which Roosevelt.
Well,
covering your bases.
FDR.
FDR. Okay.
Oh, I also said FDR.
FDR.
I had a different Roosevelt, a very old one.
And you guys are all completely wrong. What? The answer, believe it or not, is President Barack Obama.
What?
Wow. Who was there just this past May, the first time a sitting president has visited the Hall of Fame in its 75-year history.